بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه ثم أما بعد. So today, inshallah, we will try to cover two qawaid, two maxims. And as we said, we have about 50 minor maxims. Yeah, and every time I say minor, I have to remind you that they're not really minor, but just to separate them from the five major maxims. So today, inshallah, we will go over two. We have 50. We've covered already about four, and we have 46 to go. So hopefully, inshallah, it will take about, some of the following maxims will actually we can take 3 and 4 and 5 sometimes together. So it may be about 20 more weeks or even less. Maybe 15 more weeks. So we will finish al-Qawaaid much earlier than al-Adab al-Mufrad, inshallah, and then next will be mantiq, logic, inshallah. So today, the two qawaid that we will go over today are fard al-kifaya hal yata'ayyan bil-shuru', which means does a communal obligation become individually binding upon being undertaken? And the second, an-nahy yaqtadi al-fasad. Prohibition implies invalidity. Fard al-kifaya هل يتعين بالشروع. So obligation kifaya, what's the literal translation for kifaya? Sufficiency. Kafi, sufficient. Kifaya, sufficiency. So why are we calling it fard kifaya? Because it is sufficient for some people to do it. It's not necessary for all people to do it. It would be sufficient if just a few people did it. Okay. Communal obligation would be the way we translate it, because literal translation would sometimes not make much sense. So communal obligation, does it yata'ayyan? Yata'ayyan would mean become individually binding. And that's why, in Arabic, it looks much shorter, and usually it is like this. Because just the word yata'ayyan will have to be translated into becomes individually binding. Does it become individually binding? بالشروع, once undertaken, or how do I translate it? Yes, once undertaken. That's a major one. And then النهي يقتضي الفساد, that's one of the minor ones. But النهي يقتضي الفساد, the other one is actually longer, and it's big in the Hanbali madhab. It's the sort of, we're the biggest madhab on النهي يقتضي الفساد, which means prohibition implies invalidity. But let's go over this first. And first, like I said, fard al-kifaya, it literally means sufficiency, the fard of sufficiency. But how would you translate it? So fard al-kifaya would be ما طلب الشارع فعله جزما من مجموع المكلفين. ما طلب الشارع فعله جزما من مجموع المكلفين. What the lawgiver had demanded, it's basically performance emphatically. Why do we say emphatically? Because the lawgiver, either demands action, inaction, or nothing. Nothing means what? Mubah, permissible, that's neutral. The lawgiver is neutral about it. that does not assign a value to it. He allows you to do it. He doesn't ask you to do it. He doesn't ask you to refrain from it. So it's مسكوت عنه, دائرة العفو, etc. And then you have the lawgiver demanding things, demanding things to be performed, demanding action, and that would be mustahab and wajib. That would be mustahab and wajib. I don't need to translate these things because, you know, if you're attending this class, you probably know this stuff. So mustahab and wajib. And then you have on the other side, the lawgiver demanding inaction. That would be makruh and haram. That would be makruh and haram. So when we say talaban jaziman, demands it emphatically, we're just trying to define wajib. We're trying to separate wajib from mustahab. Because mustahab is demanded or not? Demanded. So the lawgiver demands action. But we don't say emphatically. Talaban jaziman. So it's talab. Mustahab is talab, but it's not jazim. Wajib is talab jazim. Demands it emphatically. And then, but here we said min majmu' al-mukallafin. So he demands it emphatically from the collective, from the community, from the collective, not from particular individuals. Therefore, of course, it's the collective of those legally responsible, because children would not be counted, because it's nothing obligatory on them. Insane people are not counted, legally responsible. So, such that if some perform it, the sin falls from the rest, and if all leave it, they all incur sin. If all leave it, they all incur sin. So I'm going to read something from al-Ghaya, Hanbali matn that you probably would be familiar with by now. So I'm going to read something because it's very telling of what we mean by fard al-kifaya. He says, وهو ما قصد أو ما قصد حصوله من غير شخص معين فإن لم يوجد إلا واحد تعين عليه كستر عار وإشباع جائع مع تعذر بيت المال وصنائع مباحة محتاج إليها غالبا كخياطة وحدادة وبناء وزرع وغرس وكدفع شبه بحجة وسيف وأمر بمعروف بشرطه وعمل قناطر وجسور وأسوار ومساجد وعمل قناطر وجسور وأسوار ومساجد وكفتوى وتعليم, which will translate into is that which is intended, fard al-kifaya is that which is intended to be realized, to be performed without specification of a particular person. If it is not found except from one person, it becomes incumbent upon him. If only one person has the aptitude to do it, the capacity is incumbent on them. Such as covering a naked person and feeding a hungry one when the public treasury is unavailable, inaccessible, etc. Crafts that are permissible and generally needed, like tailoring, blacksmithing, building, framing, and planting, repelling misconceptions with proof and sword, enjoining right with its condition. Enjoining right because al-amr bil-ma'ruf has conditions, like certain requisites to be fulfilled to enjoin that which is good properly. Constructing aqueducts, bridges, fortification walls, and mosques, issuing fatwa and teaching. So you will find here that these obligations are a mix of religious things and worldly things, right? Blacksmithing, tailoring, fatwa, teaching. So, because it's about the well-being of the community, and the well-being of the community is dependent on all of this. So nowadays, if you don't have Muslims in AI, in quantum physics, we're all sinners. If you don't have enough Muslims in quantum physics and AI, we're all sinners. That's what it means. Because it's just straightforward. It doesn't require any sort of genius. It's straightforward. Now, Tufi says, rahimahullah, when do you know that you have been absolved? So when we all go like and get into medicine because you make money when you get into medicine, that is basically not clever. It's not thoughtful. A community has to have sort of a little bit more sort of brains than this, like, So Tufi says, it's, like when do you know that you have been absolved of guilt, that, someone, the responsibility is no more on you? Is it when you become certain that somebody had already undertaken this or had performed it, or when you have predominant assumption? It's when you have predominant assumption. It's all about the dhann, it's not yaqeen. Because if you ask for yaqeen, that's so hard. Like, like, do I have to ascertain with certainty that the Muslim community had done all of these obligations one by one so that I get relieved of responsibility? No. When I have predominant assumption. Then, of course, you will not be a sinner if you're doing your best yourself, like, because it has not yet become binding on you individually. We will speak about when it becomes binding on you individually. But if you're basically reminding people that, like, because I said quantum physics, medicine, anything, like if we don't have enough people in those areas, then we're all sinners. You are a sinner if you're not doing your part, reminding people of the obligation. Like if you have the capacity to do it yourself, the aptitude, the capacity, as we will mention, then you do it yourself. But you can't do all of it yourself. Like you can't you can't do the medicine, quantum physics, AI, blacksmithing, which is still also still a communal obligation, tailoring, etc. You can't do all of this yourself. But you have to remind people that it is important for us to fulfill these obligations. And once you have predominant assumption that somebody is doing it, then you don't have to. Now, the question that we need to ask ourselves is whether upon embarking on it, upon undertaking one of these responsibilities or one of these communal obligations, does it become binding on you to carry on? You started to study medicine, or you started to study fiqh, or you started anything, started to learn blacksmithing, and we have scarcity of blacksmiths, and we have scarcity of scholars, scarcity of, AI people. Does it become binding on you to carry on? That's the question of this qaida. And it is phrased as a question because some of the qawaid that we will talk about from here on will be phrased as a question. We've even covered ones that are phrased as a question, but from here on we will have more qawaid that will be phrased as a question. And I told you before, a qaida that is phrased as a question or a qaida that has qad, may, should it be a qaida? And they agree over this. But, qad is more problematic because even the people who support it are saying may. The people who support it are saying may. But if you phrase it as a question and you support it, then you say it's qaida for me because my answer to this question is yes. So it is a qaida for me. Okay. But it just tells you, when you phrase a qaida as a question, it tells you that there is controversy. Had there not been controversy, the qaida would have not been phrased as a question. So now let's listen to At-Tufi, rahimahullah, when he speaks about this qaida. He takes the side of, yes, it becomes binding. Tufi says, yes, it does. It becomes a binding on you, individually binding on you once undertaken, once you embark on it. And then he mentions a couple of examples. One of them is like a little bit more clear than the other. Like if you are basically at the front lines, can you leave and say, this is a communal obligation? It's not wajib jihad. It's jihad, not wajib. It's a jihad that is not wajib, individually binding on you. But you are there. You are on the battlefield. You're there. Does it become individually binding on you? If you have started already to learn fiqh and there is scarcity of scholars, there is nobody in your town that can give fatwa. And you have already covered the distance in learning fiqh. Does it become binding on you to carry on until you're capable of issuing fatwas, until you're capable of mediating between people or judging between people and issuing fatwas and so on? In a community like this, do we have to have enough people to teach and to give fatwa and to basically preside over conflicts and negotiations and stuff like this and provide Islamic input? Of course. And then the whole community will be sinners if you don't have enough people to do this work. So al-Tufi takes the side of, yes, it does become individually binding. So he says, then people may disagree with this. So why am I saying it becomes individually binding? He mentions the reasoning, my reasoning, he says, is that by initiating the action, the right of others becomes attached to it. Exoneration, they become absolved of responsibility. Once you have started, like the rights of others become attached to your carrying on, your completing of the job. Where in this town you started, you became the most sort of learned among us in fiqh, and we don't have muftis and we don't have qadis and so on. The rights of everybody is saying, Hassan is already doing it, so I don't have to worry about it. I'm just gonna learn blacksmithing or something. And, my right, which is my exoneration from sin, becomes attached to you finishing the job. Therefore, Tufi says that it becomes a binding on you to finish the job. And then he mentions two contentions. One contention is supererogatory prayers. He mentions that people say, no, it doesn't become individually binding. Supererogatory fasting, for instance, So al-mutatawwi' amiru nafsihi, they say this. Like if the person who's doing something voluntarily is in control. He has the right. So he says that some people would argue that if you're doing basically a non-obligatory fasting, supererogatory fasting, non-obligatory fasting, you're in full control to end your fasting, and then you're not basically liable for anything. Of course, that's a Hanbali position. The Malikis and Hanafis may disagree, but that's a they'll ask you to make up. So this is a controversial position to begin with, but he has to answer to Hanbalis. He is Hanbali. Tufi is Hanbali. He has Hanbalis. So he tells them, but this is different. Supererogatory fasting is different because nobody's right becomes attached to your fasting. You started fasting, you ended fasting. That's it. But when you start learning, everybody in town will be relieved of the sin, and then when you stop, then you put it back on them. Then he mentions another example, which is the qadi being able to basically resign. excuse himself from, remove himself from office. The Qadi being able to remove himself from office. So he says that it is agreed upon that a Qadi can remove himself from office. People argued against him. It's agreed upon that a Qadi can remove himself from office. So no, it doesn't become individually binding. So he says, no, he can't remove himself from office if there is no one else to do it. That's one. The second, he is removing himself from office because he is the deputy of the Sultan, the ruler. So he is removing himself from office, not in his individual capacity, but as the deputy of the ruler, and the ruler can remove, because the Qadi is the deputy of the ruler. And in that capacity, he is removing himself from office. So what do we say about this? This agreement between people, between the fuqaha, we can have a synthesis. We can reconcile things. So ultimately, it depends on aptitude. It depends on aptitude and the ability to dedicate yourself to it. Of course, it depends first on scarcity of people, are there others who are doing it or on their way to doing it or have undertaken, the job already? In this case, it's not individually binding on you. That's the first thing. The second thing is, do you have the aptitude? Whether it's all forms of aptitude. That is intellectual aptitude, that is psychological aptitude. It's just all forms of aptitude. That's physical aptitude if you're learning blacksmithing. So do you have the aptitude to carry on? It's the second thing. Third is proximity. How close are you to finishing the job? And then, of course, you may, and certainly you cannot basically identify a threshold for each and every communal obligation. And you say that this is the threshold, and if you have crossed it, then it becomes individually. But the concept, and eventually you will have to make that decision yourself, but the concept of proximity. I started learning fiqh. So I finished one matan in the Hanbali madhab, one small matan in the Hanafi madhab. Am I really close to being a faqih and give fatwa and qadi and stuff? Of course not. But someone who finished basically 3 levels in each discipline of knowledge, and there is no one that can do the job. You're very close. You're very close. Therefore, that person, if he has the aptitude and there is scarcity, and then he does the circumstances also, so aptitude, proximity, and circumstances. He's able to dedicate time. He doesn't have family obligations that prevent him, or circumstantial sort of obligations that would prevent him from proceeding. Then he must proceed. Then he has to finish the job because he has the aptitude, all forms of aptitude and capacity. He's close. Nothing is preventing him circumstantially, and there is scarcity of people. So, if you're studying quantum physics and you decide, and there is nobody who's there studying, or there is scarcity, and and you decide to get into business to make money, after you have studied quantum physics for 12 years and got your sort of degrees and all of that, then it would be an issue. Okay. Next is النهي يقتضي الفساد. Is that clear? فرض الكفاية. So aptitude or capacity, all forms of aptitude or capacity, proximity, And we're beginning with scarcity of people who can do it. Aptitude and capacity, proximity, and then no impediments, no circumstantial impediments. Okay. النهي يقتضي الفساد, prohibition implies invalidity. And this is like I told you, Hanbalis are big on this one. We're the most expansive in applying this qaida of all madhahib. It's both, it straddles usul al-fiqh and qawaid fiqhiyya. So it is foundational and legal maxim, usuli qaida as well. So usuli and fiqhi qaida usuliyya fiqhiyya. النهي يقتضي الفساد, prohibition implies invalidity. Like I said, Hanbalis use this quite often. But I want you to keep in mind that prohibition of what? Prohibition applies, just keep this in mind like a mental map. Prohibition applies to the essence of the action, whether it is worship or transaction. Whether it is worship or transaction, ibadat or mu'amalat, the prohibition either applies to the essence, applies to a condition. Condition means something essential. A pillar is among the is part of the essence, part of the mahiyya. Applies to condition, or applies to something extraneous, because things will be different between these. When we talk about condition, there are certain conditions that are specific to the act of worship or the transaction, and certain conditions that are non-specific. So what do we have now? How many basically categories we have? 1, 2, 3, 4. In this order. Goes from essence, condition that's specific, condition that's non-specific, extraneous. Okay. Why does النهي يقتضي الفساد? النهي يقتضي الفساد because the Prophet said من أحدث في أمرنا هذا ما ليس منه فهو رد من عمل عملا ليس عليه أمرنا فهو رد. Whoever sort of introduces in this affair of ours something new, it will be rejected, or something that's foreign to it will be rejected. And whoever does or something that is foreign to our affair is going to be rejected. And then, of course, the Prophet ﷺ said, كل شرط ليس في كتاب الله فهو باطل وإن كان مئة شرط. Every condition that is not found in the book of Allah is void, even if it's many 100 conditions. So, but when we talk about invalidity, what do we mean by invalidity? Invalidity means that there are no legal consequences for the action, no legal effect, no legal sort of outcome. Whether it is an act of worship, so when we say that it did not produce the legal effect, what's the legal effect? You pray the Asr, but you didn't have wudu, and you figure out that you didn't have wudu. Your prayer did not produce the legal effect. What is it? To absolve you of responsibility for Asr. So it didn't drop it. It didn't, you're still responsible to pray Asr. Okay, so if you conduct a sale transaction and it doesn't produce the legal effect, what's the legal effect? Transfer of ownership. Transfer of ownership. So if we will deem that sale transaction invalid, then there was no transfer of ownership. There's no transfer of ownership. You know, I mentioned here that fasad and butlan, fasid and batil. Many of us are used to the words fasid and batil. Batil means what? Means invalid. Fasid means what? Invalid. How do we, you know, nullity, butlan, null, batil, fasid, invalid. In reality, they mean the same thing. You know, so fasid literally would mean what? Corrupted. Batil would mean void, null, invalid. They mean what by it? The same thing, invalid. It did not produce the legal effect. Most of the scholars do that. You know, certainly, you know, unlike the Hanafis, who are saying that Hanbalis use fasid and batil the same way. Some Hanbalis make a distinction between fasid and batil, but it is not like the Hanafi distinction. Some Hanbalis make a distinction between fasid and batil by the level of agreement on its fasad and butlan, or its prohibition. Something that is agreed upon, they will call it batil. Something that is not agreed upon, they will call it fasid. So if you have, if someone, you know nikah al-mut'ah, temporary marriage, is that fasid or batil in that sense? Batil, because it's agreed upon. We don't count Shia, by the way, when we say agreed upon. So we count Sunni fiqh. So it's agreed upon. So it is batil. What if you have nikah min ghayri wali, nikah without a guardian? Is that fasid or batil? Fasid, not batil. What is the difference here? Because Hanafi said it's okay. So, إذا حكم به حاكم لا ينقض حكم الحاكم. In this case, we Hanbalis say, if a ruler decreed this marriage, or basically gave a fatwa about this marriage, or ruled this marriage as valid marriage, or conducted the marriage, Hanafi conducted the marriage, ruled it valid, etc., then we will not void it. Because it is fasid, not batil. Now Hanbalis are going to all agree on this, but some Hanbalis will go the extra length to separate in terminology between fasid and batil. Many Hanbalis will not basically pay attention to this. Fasid is batil, batil is fasid. Will they pay attention to the distinction between agreed on and not? Yes, they will. And they will not treat them similarly. They will treat them differently. But they will not basically give them different labels. It's fasid, batil stuff. But this agreed on, this not agreed on. So if it is agreed on, then we will void it. If it is not agreed on, we will not void it if a fatwa about it was issued by another hakim who follows another madhab. Okay, next, Ibn Rajab rahimahullah, the Imam Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali rahimahullah, says about acts of worship. So if he says that if it returns to the essence of the ibadah, if the prohibition returns to the essence of the ibadah, it is invalid. If it returns to a condition specific to it, it is invalid. If it returns to a condition that is not specific to it, and we will give examples, it is still invalid according to, but there is a little controversy here in the madhab, but it is invalid according to the official position of the madhab. So invalid, invalid, invalid. You know, invalid, invalid, invalid. And if it is extraneous, then it is valid. Keep in mind that even extraneous, Hanbalis disagreed, because some Hanbalis, any prohibition, even if the matter is extraneous to the ibadah, Abu Bakr, said invalid, but most Hanbalis said valid about the extraneous one. So, first category, examples. Fasting on this essence. So the prohibition applies to the essence. If you fast on the day of Eid, that very fasting is prohibited. You're fasting on the day of Eid. The Prophet ﷺ prohibited fasting on the day of Eid. The very act that you're doing is prohibited. Therefore, it's a no-brainer. It is fasid, batil, it's invalid. Prayer during the prohibited times. The Prophet prohibited you from praying during these times. So the Prophet ﷺ said, there is no prayer when the sun, there is no prayer after the morning prayer until the sun rises. There is no prayer after the Asr prayer until the sun sets. If you, and certainly حين يقوم قائم الظهيرة also, when the sun is close to the horizon, these are the times that are prohibited. And the closer you get to sunrise and sunset, the intensity of the prohibition increases. But these are the prohibited times. You pray during the prohibited times, your prayer is invalid, because that thing itself is prohibited. Prayer in prohibited locations, and this is a Hanbali thing. And there is, so it is invalid. It is invalid. Because we have two positions in the madhab. Where the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ prohibited praying in certain areas. Like what? Yeah, like al-hammam wal-hajj ومعاطن الإبل and قارعات الطريق, and So if you pray in a bathhouse, if you pray in like the lavatory, a place of relieving oneself, if you pray in the resting places of camels, if you pray in al-Majzara, slaughterhouse, if you pray in al-Mazbala, dumpster, So places like this. If you pray in them, does the prohibition indicate tahrim or karaha? According to the official position of the madhab, it indicates tahrim. Therefore, it's invalid. Your prayer is invalid. And then you add to this the qaida that we talked about before, taba'. And then what happens with the taba'? The subsidiary follows, or the dependent follows. If you pray on top of it, on the roof, your prayer is invalid. If you pray on the roof of a slaughterhouse, your prayer is invalid. Okay. Fasting the days of Tashriq, that's also prohibited, unless you're doing the expiation for tamattu or qiran or something, then it's not prohibited, because that's what, the Prophet allowed this. But otherwise, أيام منى أيام أكل وشرب, أيام منى أيام أكل وشرب. The Prophet ﷺ prohibited fasting the days of Tashriq. Marrying prohibited kin, maharim. Someone who marries his aunt will consider this invalid, of course. And, so some of the things here, other scholars may disagree with us. But some of the things, they will agree with us. Of course, this is one of them. You marry your mahram, all of them would agree that it is invalid, that this cannot be basically corrected. But to pray in prohibited locations, there will be disagreements, on this issue, even within the madhab. Sale of prohibited items. sale of prohibited items, of course it's invalid. The thing itself is prohibited. That you're selling wine, you're selling pork, that transaction is prohibited, so that sale is invalid. Second category, pertaining to something external does not entail invalidity. So I put the second category here because sometimes it is helpful to do the extremes first and then to go inward. And try in your study of fiqh to do this all the time. Identify the ends of the spectrum, because at the ends of the spectrum you will find agreement. And you, in your mind, the map will be clear. The borders will be clear. These are the boundaries. This end of the spectrum, there is agreement here. This end of the spectrum, there is agreement here. And move inward from the two ends of the spectrum to address controversy. Okay. The second category, pertaining to something external or extraneous, does not entail invalidity. And you will see that sometimes it does. So, wearing a usurped turban, silk turban, gold ring does not entail invalidity, even though Abu Bakr said it does. I am praying, keep in mind, we will address, if you're covering your nakedness with a usurped maghsoob cloak, that's different. We will address this later, but you're wearing a turban that is usurped. You're wearing a ring that is maghsoob, usurped. Or you're wearing a silk turban. It's haram to wear a silk turban as a man. Women don't wear turbans anyway. So wearing a silk turban is haram, okay? But is this applying to the essence of the worship? Is this applying to a condition? No. Because whether you wear a turban or not, your salah is fine. You don't have to wear a turban for your salah to be fine. You don't have to wear a ring for your salah to be fine. So all of this, Abu Bakr said invalid. Your salah is invalid. Abu Bakr really was taking it he was taking it to heart too much. But most of the Hanbalis will say your salah is valid. Okay. Fasting while backbiting. Fasting while backbiting. Who said it's invalid? Ibn Hazm, but nobody in the madhab, I can't recollect anyone from the madhab, or maybe any of the four madhab, who said, of course it will diminish your reward. Of course it will diminish your reward, greatly diminish your reward. But backbiting is extraneous to the worship of fasting. But Ibn Hazm said it's, because he took it to heart, he took the hadith to heart. مَنْ لَمْ يَدَعْ قَوْلَ الزُّورِ وَالْعَمَلْ بِهِ فَلَيْسَ لِلَّهِ حَاجَةٌ فِي أَنْ يَدَعَ طَعَامَهُ وَشَرَابَهُ. He who does not abandon or give up, false testimony or false speech and false actions, Allah does not need him to give up eating and drinking. Because Allah is telling you to stay away from mubah. Allah is trying to basically train you to restraint, Allah is teaching you to self-restraint. And then you're fasting from mubah, and then you're committing haram. But the four madhahib agree that if you do things while you're fasting, that doesn't invalidate your fasting if these are extraneous to the act of worship. Performing ablution from a prohibited vessel. Performing ablution from a prohibited vessel. Now, not usurped water, but prohibited or usurped vessel. The water is not usurped, the vessel is. The vessel is prohibited or usurped, but the water is okay, the water is halal. And then in this case, it would be extraneous, external to the act of worship. Now, the third category, prohibition that pertains to a condition. Two types: condition that is specific to the act of worship, condition that is not specific to the act of worship. So, specific to the act of worship, sales involving excessive uncertainty, gharar. Gharar, or uncertainty, is specific to sales, a condition specific to sales. Ignorance of price, or selling what one does not own. If you sell something that you don't own, these are conditions specific to the transaction. These are conditions of validity of the transaction that are specific to the transaction. Removal of ambiguity. You know, in Islamic transactions, sale transactions, you have to remove ambiguity. You have to identify the price and the commodity. In this case, you violated a condition specific to the transaction, therefore, it is invalid. Prayer in a garment bearing impurity. Prayer in a garment bearing impurity. The purity of the garment is specific to salah or not? Specific to salah. Prayer in a garment. Like, mubasharat al-najasat in general. Mubasharat al-najasat in general. Is it haram? No. No. It is haram if you need basically to have purity. And so in salah, you have to have purity. To touch a najasa, is it haram? No, it's not haram. But if you pray, you have to wash your hand. You have to wash your hand. Everybody knows that it is not haram to touch a najasa, right? Okay. But if you pray, and certainly there is like some disagreement about mubasharat al-najasa when you don't need to, but like sometimes you have to. But the idea here is, like, you have to maintain purity of your body, your garment, and your place of prostration, like the ground that you pray on in salah. These are specific to salah, specific acts to salah. So outside the salah, these are not conditions. These are just specific to salah. So the prohibition relates here specifically to a condition, of the act that is specific to it. Therefore, your salah is invalid. Second, conditions that are not specific, so the madhab will say what? The official position of the madhab will say still invalid, even if the condition is not specific to the act of worship. But here, some Hanbalis will say valid. There will be a disagreement here because we're getting far away from the essence. We're getting far away from the essence. If the prohibition applies to the essence, of course, it's a no-brainer. You married your aunt, so the prohibition applies to the essence. Condition applies to prohibition applies to a condition specific to the essence. Of course, it's also close. The sale was corrupted. You prayed in an impure garment, stuff. Okay. Then here, not specific now. Not specific now. Ablution using usurped water. Ablution using usurped water. Usurpation, ghasb, is specific to wudu, specific to salah? No, it's not. So it's something that's not specific. Therefore, there will be controversy here. The controversy is called what? What is it that they disagree about? It's called infikak al-jiha. Infikak al-jiha, which I translated as separation of consideration or something. Yeah, separation of consideration. Separation of consideration. There are two different considerations. One of them, I'm praying, I made the wudu correctly. I used water, I made wudu perfectly fine. That water is usurped. Is there infikaak jiha? And we will say that there is separation of consideration. There is the consideration of tahrim, of ghasb, is separate from the consideration of validity of prayer. There is enough separation here that would make my salah valid, even though it is haram for me to usurp water, and I get punished for that. But I am absolved of responsibility. I prayed. And then there is the very, very popular example, which is Salah fi Dar al-Maghsuba. That is a pretty Hanbali thing, to pray in a usurped property, inside a usurped property. So the second example is pilgrimage funded by usurped wealth. Pilgrimage funded by usurped wealth. Valid or invalid? The madhab will say what? Invalid, of course. The madhab will say invalid. I told you, the madhab says, because the funding, the money that you use is a condition of validity. It's a condition of obligation, but they will treat it as a condition of validity. شرط وجوب لا شرط صحة. But they will treat it, you don't have to have the funds for your Hajj to be valid, but you have to have the funds for the Hajj to be obligatory on you. But they will treat shart al-wujub here, the condition of obligation, like shart al-sahha, the condition of validity. And they will say that this is very close to the essence, somehow. And then they will invalidate your Hajj. Prayer in usurped or silk garment. Prayer in a usurped or silk garment. Now, this is different from the turban. Because this is now covering your nakedness. Covering your nakedness, or satr al-awra, is a condition of validity in the prayer? Yes. So you're fulfilling that condition with a prohibited action, with a prohibited item. Okay. But two views, and the madhab says invalid. And the invalidity, the reasoning of the invalidity here is: one, you committed a prohibited action; two, you did not cover your nakedness. And based on this controversy, they'll have another controversy. So you're wearing this, you stole it, or you usurped it, and you're covering your nakedness with it. Okay, now, why is my salah invalid? Is it invalid because I committed a prohibited action during the salah, in the salah? Or is it invalid because I did not cover my nakedness? Legally, I did not cover my nakedness. You may argue that since this is usurped, I didn't cover my nakedness, because my covering of my nakedness was done by a muharram, so it's not legally consequential, not legally effective. So now, if you say the latter, which is failing to fulfill a command or a commanded condition of the prayer, I did not cover my nakedness, one who has only a usurped garment and prays in it would have a valid prayer. If you say it, I did not cover my nakedness, but one who has only a usurped garment and wears it will have a valid prayer. If it is the former, which is that you committed a prohibited act, then it's still invalid. Even if you have one garment only, it would still be invalid. And that is the madhab. As for silk garments, if you only have a silk garment, to cover your nakedness, is it like a usurped garment? No. If you have a silk garment, wear it to cover your nakedness, because it would be permissible in this case, in the case of lack of alternatives. Why did they make a distinction between a silk garment and a usurped garment? Because they said that these are two different levels of prohibition. Silk garments have been allowed for a need, you know, and silk garments, like if someone has like an itch or something, they can wear silk garments. So since silk garments have been allowed sometimes for a need, then if you only have a silk garment, cover your nakedness with it, and your prayer will be fine. What if you're wearing two garments? One of them is usurped. The madhab will say, now, why is this another question? You're having two garments on top of each other, and one of them is usurped. So you did not, like, the contention here is, you're saying that it is invalid, the prayer is invalid because he's covering his nakedness with a usurped garment, prohibited act. So now he has two garments on top of each other. One of them is usurped. The madhab would say it's invalid, and they will justify this by the fact that none of them تعينت لستر العورة. So how do I translate this? Designated, exclusively designated for satr al-awra. Exclusively designated for satr al-awra. Anyway, now the very common example, which is Salah ad-Dar al-Maghsuba, to prayer place, to pray in a place that is haram. Usurped place. So we have two bases for the invalidity to pray in a usurped place. One of them is what? One of them applies to the essence, one of them applies to a condition that is specific to the prayer. When it comes to the essence, we say what? We say your very movements and stillness all are of the essence of the prayer are haram. Like this particular house, usurped house, your occupation of space within this particular house is haram. When you pray and you're standing like this, your very standing is occupying a prohibited space. When you make ruku', that space that you're occupying now, which is different from qiyam, you're making ruku', that space that you're occupying is prohibited for you to occupy. Therefore, it applies to the essence of the prayer itself. Some say it applies to condition, because space, place, not necessarily space, but place is a condition in Salah. Therefore, it is not allowable to pray in a swing, and it is not allowable to pray on a flying carpet if you are one of those. But that doesn't apply to airplanes nowadays, because we'll have to make that exception, I guess. But in the Hanbali madhab, it was not allowable to pray on a flying carpet. You need to come down and pray and then go back. Okay. On a flying carpet? Because place, you have to be on the ground to pray. You can't fly, you can be flying or as you pray. It will be problematic now with airplanes and stuff like this, but that used to be so now it's okay to pray in an airplane. It's fine. Huh? What's that? Al-Urjuha? Yeah. But in the Hanbali madhab, Salah al-Urjuha is not permissible. They consider as a place a condition of the validity of the Salah. They want you to pray on the ground. So anyway, so if you don't fulfill that condition in a halal way, and you fulfill that condition in a haram way because the place that you're praying in is haram, then your salah is invalid. Like I said, our madhab takes this qa'ada to heart in application. Our madhab goes as far as invalidating the salah of al-munfarid khalf al-saf, the prayer of a single person behind the rows. You may say that it's not just this qa'ida. You may say that the Prophet ﷺ, as Tirmidhi reported, commanded the person who prayed behind the rows to repeat the prayer. So that the people in the madhab may say, well, we don't need anything more than this. We don't need any evidence more than this. The Prophet ordered him to repeat the prayer. You guys are saying that he ordered them nadban. He ordered him, he preferred for him to, repeat the prayer. And we don't accept that argument. But the other scholars will say that Abu Bakr, when they started the Jama'ah, Abu Bakr made ruku'ah behind the rows and walked as he was making ruku'ah to join the rows. The Prophet ﷺ said to him, "Zadakallahu hirsan wa la ta'ud." May Allah increase you in your scrupulosity or hirs, keenness, but don't do it again. So they say that the Prophet did not invalidate his prayer. It's a controversial condition, but what made us likely, what made us inclined to the hadith of Tirmidhi, where the Prophet ﷺ ordered the person who prayed behind the lines to repeat the prayer, is that it is in agreement, in harmony with our qaida, النهي يقتضي الفساد. Prohibition implies invalidity. Prohibition implies invalidity. And then if you're prohibited from praying behind the rows and you must join the rows, then that would imply invalidity if you pray behind the rows. So it just shows you, it's an example to show you how, wide is our application of this qaida. Expansive is our application of this qaida. Now, Salah al-Dar al-Maqsuba, Salah bil-Ma' al-Maqsub, the majority will consider prayer in a usurped property, prayer with usurped water, like after washing with usurped water and things of that nature. The majority will consider this to be valid. So, like I said, these are the four categories. And so if you make like so here is the prohibition. I have this picture for you in So just a mental image. Essence, invalid. Condition that is specific, I should have put it next to the essence, invalid. Condition that is not specific, invalid, but some scholars said valid. Extraneous, valid, but a few scholars said invalid. That's it. That's the bottom line. قل قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك اشهد ان لا اله الا انت استغفرك واتوب اليك. Well, let's come back for al-adab at 9:15.